Hey gamers, it's Ed Park aka Taugrim, and I am so excited because I just finished off a big 2-day 20-person offsite, so I get to catch up with you guys on some really important news about Star Wars The Old Republic. As you probably heard, the executive producer Rich Vogel has left and there has been another round of layoffs. So I want to talk about what happened to SWTOR and BioWare from two different perspectives, from a business perspective and from a gamer's perspective. But before I do that, I want to thank Chris on my blog. He came up with a really good idea for a name, TaugVlog. So this is TaugVlog episode 2, and I'm going to stick with that name right now over TaugCast and Taugrim Talks and Taug Talks, which were the other ones that seemed popular based on y'all's feedback. First of all, BioWare bet the farm on the idea that content was the fourth pillar that was missing. It was a secret sauce, and if you look at what they did and the way they described their work, for example, that it was the largest voiceover project in history, BioWare really totally committed to developing rich storyline content, across the 8 classes and through the leveling questing experience, in a way that no one has ever done before. And this was BioWare's bread and butter. This is what they did for their single player, PC games. This is what they knew. This is what they were great at. So let's sort this out. BioWare's, the estimates are that they spent $200 million to develop Star Wars The Old Republic. And while that number may seem crazy, consider this. At GDC 2012, I heard Rich Vogel and Dallas Dickinson talk about their experience in launching a AAA MMO. And what they stressed is that they were managing a 600 to 700 person team, and they talked about all the complexity of doing so. If you look at a 600 person team and you assume that the average cost per person per year is $100,000, and I don't mean that they're getting paid $100K. It means between their salary, their benefits, the cost of hiring, training, equipments, licenses, the facilities they work in, all the travel they had to do, the multiple office moves that they had to do, you add up those collective costs, $100K seems like a pretty reasonable ballpark, and 600 people working for a year generates a burn rate of $60 million. So if you do this for just over 3 years, that's $200 million. So I think those numbers that have been tossed out there are actually pretty realistic, right? So BioWare bet the farm on story. They invested $200 million, in the game. And if you look at it, aside from the core game mechanics, I'm talking about, the UI, the server, the middleware, the netcode, the database, the core class mechanics, all that good stuff, their pipeline, their rollout strategy, the server infrastructure, all that good stuff. When you look at the amount of energy that they spent in terms of the content, what it feels like from a player perspective is that they invested 80% of their time doing the story-driven leveling questing content, but only 20% at endgame. I'm not saying that they went live with too little PvE content. It's just that players were so, I would say, spoiled and enjoyed the leveling process, which was so distinctive and truly immersive, right? The story stuff was awesome. They go from level 1 to 49, but then when they hit endgame, there just doesn't seem to be as much to do, and there's not much. The story, the quest lines, they're pretty much done. You finished your story. So it's possible that BioWare, they believed too much in their own hypothesis that story was truly going to be the great distinctive differentiator for their game. They overinvested in it here. They didn't spend enough time here, and the problem is, Star Wars is a vertical scaling game. And if you're wondering what that is, check out this video. I explain what vertical scaling is. Basically, it's a game where you progress through levels, and then once you hit level cap, the experience changes, and then you progress through tiers of content, which generally means tiers of gear, right? And the challenge with doing a vertical scaling model is once you level through content, or once you outgear content, it's really no longer relevant or challenging for you, right? And you could roll an alt and do all that kind of stuff and re-experience it, but the replayability or the time to live value is actually pretty low, right? So a lot of energy spent developing leveling content, not so much relatively in terms of endgame, and this is where people end up spending a lot of time, and to build up content here takes a lot of time and energy, right? So BioWare committed to story being the fourth pillar. They believed it, they marketed it that way, they pitched it. They invested $200+ million in building the game. The 80-20 rules, it feels like they did 80% of their content on story-driven stuff as opposed to 20% at endgame, right? And now they're stuck with a situation where they were, I mean, to be honest, let's be frank, they hemorrhaged subscriptions, right? Subscribers. They went down from 1.7 million down to 1.3 million, and my very honest opinion now in July, mid-July, we're realistically looking at probably well under 1 million players still subscribe to the game. You know, most of the people that I know play the game have stopped playing. Most people aren't subscribed anymore. You know, we can't get critical mass to play the game. You know, and we tried for a while to recruit new people into the guild who are interested in you know, gaming with us and playing with us, but it didn't solve the fact that there just wasn't enough there. And I think part of this, it's not just the 80-20 rule. So I'm indicating, so there was, when the game launched, it felt like 80% of the content development had been here, leveling, 20% at endgame, and then on top of that, it feels like the game was launched 6 months too early, right? So a lot of us, you know, we've said on Game Breaker that if 1.2 had been 1.0, if that had been the game version that launched at release, and they had waited 6 months to launch the game until that was ready, you know, 5-6 months, they would have been in a very different state. Now, I believe, and a lot of people believe, that EA pushed BioWare to launch the game before it was ready, despite lots of beta feedback that there was still some polish needed, and the interface sucked because it wasn't customizable, and, you know, other issues with the game. There's the impression that, you know, BioWare pushed the baby out the door, you know, and before it was really ready, it's premature birth, basically, right? And you can look at this from a couple perspectives, and I don't fault EA per se and think that they're an evil, bad company that kills gaming studios. You have to look at this from a business perspective. Remember, they funded $200 million, you know, to develop Star Wars: The Old Republic, and that's a long time to be investing and not seeing a dime, you know, return on investment, right? That increased their financial risk. Now, here's the challenge in terms of launching a AAA quality MMO that costs tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. Is, of course, if you launch 6 months earlier, then you get those purchase fees 6 months earlier, right? So you get the interest or float on that money for 6 months, plus you get the monthly subscriptions over that period of time. Let's just say that Star Wars had 1 million subs for 6 months. That's $15 million in revenue a month, 6 months, $90 million, right? So they get an upfront cash injection plus the float on that cash, the purchase fees, plus $90 million of subscription revenue that's recurring, right? But that's basically a one-time benefit. If the game had launched 6 months later, the question is, would the game have been sufficiently ready that a lot of people wouldn't have left? And I think what happened was Stars was pushed out too early, I believe by, you know, pressure from EA. And because the game went live too early, a lot of people who came to the game and had certain expectations, like having a customizable UI, not one that looked totally different from every other game, you know, having a functional auction house, having a group finder, you know, things like that. It put BioWare in a heavy scrambling mode where not only did they have to debug the issues in the existing content, things they knew about, but they had to add features and functionality of the game that were missing to bring it to competitive parity with other games, right? On top of this, there was already, you know, because the game launched early and because subscribers were leaving, what happened was you have this vicious cycle where people are leaving the game, populations on a lot of servers, and I mentioned this in the first week, that I thought BioWare launched with too many servers. They should have waited till the servers were pretty loaded in terms of population for opening more, but they didn't, and around the end of last year, end of December or New Year's, they launched like 30 or 40 more servers, which never got for most of, even beyond standard population, right? So you have, after several months, you have a lot of servers that are basically low pop, which means you don't have enough critical mass of players to do PvE content, PvP content, you know, you don't have a functional economy, and a lot of those people simply leave because they don't want to reroll and go somewhere else. And by the time BioWare had launched, you know, the character transfer functionality, you know, it was to some degree too late for a lot of people. They had already stopped playing, right? So I think there are multiple issues associated with launching game too early. You know, there's certain things that need to be at parity, and, you know, the gamers were waiting around for BioWare to bring a lot of things that they were expecting, especially in patch 1.2, and so that didn't launch until I think it was sometime mid-April, right? So that's like 4 months after the game launched, which was too long for some people. Okay, so that's a situation, and then to compound things more seriously, you know, we just heard that there's a second round of layoffs at BioWare, and the first layer of cuts was pretty deep. We haven't heard specific publicized numbers, but a lot of very prominent members of the team were let go, and, you know, now we have another round of layoffs, you know, just a couple months later. If you look at these things, EA can spin however they want, that, you know, they care about the game, they're going to continue to invest in it, that, you know, the game is going to prosper and players are going to be playing it a decade from now. But let's look at this realistically, right? They've had 2 rounds of layoffs within a short time frame period, right? So the team is growing small. What we've heard from EA is that they're looking at a free-to-play model, which I argued a long time ago they should do from a customer acquisition perspective. But here's the catch. The game is, if they go free to play, games built on a vertical scaling model. And here's what happens. With a vertical scaling model, you have two options. You either have to continue adding content because people will chew through it, right? Or what you do is you just have the amount of content you have and you make it grindy as hell to the point of being painful, so people want to pay to make this leveling and tiering experience less painful. One's bad from a customer experience perspective, the grinding, right? The latter. The former, in order to keep adding content to keep people busy and engaged, requires a tremendous amount of development effort. And if you have a free-to-play model, inherently, you're not getting that injection of cash in terms of an upfront purchase fee and a monthly subscription. So basically, because they do, a vertical scaling model is not inherently compatible with a free-to-play model. A lot of games have gone free-to-play with vertical scaling, but like I said, the vast majority of them, they don't have that much content, they're grindy as hell, and none of those games have ever gained truly meaningful traction, right? The only games that we've seen recently blow the doors off the industry are games that are free-to-play and have a horizontal scaling model. Games like League of Legends, now like the wildfire most popular game. And this brings me to my conclusion. You might say, well, what should SWTOR do, or what could they do? What could BioWare do? I think they're in a tough spot. Basically, there's a joke in the software and high-tech industry. If you give a company $100 million to build a product, they're going to spend $100+ million and go big game hunting. They're going to think big, right? And when you do this, the chance that you're going to reasonably deliver a viable product that's going to truly work in the market, before you've had sufficient time to really test it, chances are pretty low, right? And the high-tech industry, the online industry, we figured this stuff out 10 years ago after the dot-com, era, which is for the most part, if you want to launch a successful product or online business, you go for the minimum viable product first, and then you expand upon it based on customer feedback, right? And that's generally, it's the least risk, it's the most profitable, it's the most now tried and true method, and it really synergizes well with development methodologies such as Agile, which are proven at this point. And this is the utter irony. Again, the developers for League of Legends and World of Tanks put a fraction of the money that other companies have done in building AAA quality MMOs recently, but they implemented horizontal scaling models with limited content that has incredibly high replayability and is fun as heck, and that's all that matters. It's not the volume of content that you create. That's the lie in the vertical scaling model. More is not better. It's the quality of replayability of the content and the relative investment required by the developer to create that good replayable content and the benefit that the player will get out of it. So it's a synergistic approach that works for both the gamer and for the developer. And I don't know how long it's going to take for the gaming industry really gets it. Anyway, let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. Please like, share, favorite, subscribe. Let me know what other questions you have about the gaming industry, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care. I'm going to talk to you tonight about Guild Wars 2, and I had started a poll on Thursday night on a whim, just asking people out of 5 classes which one they would most like to see me play in Beta Weekend Event 3. So the 5 classes were Engineer,